on something. And that is, you've said you're not going to negotiate the destruction of your health care plan. You're not going to negotiate on the debt limit. Exactly what are you prepared to negotiate on and when?
Well, I'm prepared to negotiate on anything. I think it's important for us to talk about how we create a budget that is creating jobs, encouraging growth, dealing with our long-term debt issues. The deficits are coming down at the fastest pace since World War II. They've been cut in half since I came into office, but we still have some challenges in terms of our long-term health care spending on Medicare in particular. So whatever the leadership wants to talk about, we've got a budget, and we think we've got some good answers, but we don't expect 100%. But what I've also said is that it is not acceptable for one faction of one party in one chamber to say either we get what we want or we'll shut down the government, or even worse, we will not allow the U.S. Treasury to pay its bills and put the United States in default for the first time in history. So the message I have for the leaders is very simple. As soon as we get a clean piece of legislation that reopens the government, and there is a majority for that right now in the House of Representatives,
but no negotiation until after that?
Until we get that done, until we make sure that Congress allows Treasury to pay for things that Congress itself already authorized, we are not going to engage in a series of negotiations. And the reason, John, is very simple. If we get in a habit where a few folks, an extremist wing of one party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, are allowed to extort concessions based on a threat of undermining the full faith and credit of the United States, then any president who comes after me, not just me, will find themselves unable to govern effectively, and that is not something that I'm going to allow to happen.
An aide to the Speaker yesterday, when I asked him where can this get resolved, ultimately said, in a budget negotiation, maybe involving replacement of sequester cuts with entitlement cuts, if you get to that discussion, is it conceivable, are there any circumstances under which you could make a budget deal with Republicans that does not involve new taxes?
I think it is possible for us to make sure that we are not increasing the income tax rate. That is something that was debated during the campaign. That's now behind us. I think it is very important for us to continue to cut out programs that are unnecessary, not working. Some of them need to be reformed. It is important for us to deal with our long-term entitlement spending. But I also think it's important for us to make sure that we're investing in the things that are going to help the economy grow. And I'll just give you one specific example, and that's our infrastructure. Every business that's watching this program relies on good roads, airports that function, ports that are working, and we are vastly underinvesting in what is critical for our long-term growth. We've got to find a way to pay for that.
So, is there any deal you could accept, even a small deal, that does not involve revenue, which is the problem on the Republican side?
Well, I think we have to distinguish between income tax hikes, which they've always been adverse to.
Loopholes too. No revenue.
Well, I think that we're going to have to close some loopholes in order to pay for those things that are going to help us grow. But the important point here, John, is that in the normal give and take between parties, that's something we should be able to solve. Keep in mind, in terms of reopening the government, what Democrats have already said they're willing to do is to vote for reopening the government at funding levels that the Republicans have established and that the Democrats don't like. So if John Boehner puts the Senate bill on the floor right now, that maintains the status quo. It doesn't increase government spending beyond where it already is. It's far short of what Democrats think are necessary for us to invest in things like education and research and development and all the things that are important. But what we're saying is we'll put everything on hold. We can enter into robust negotiations around all these issues. Democrats won't get 100% of what they want. Republicans won't either. But that's the kind of democratic process the American people expect.
Before the election last year, you said you thought there was a possibility your reelection would break the fever within the Republican Party. It didn't happen. Do you see this moment as a chance through this political confrontation to break the fever now?
You know, the interesting thing, John, is that the majority of Republicans around the country, people who voted Republican, they may disagree with me on a whole range of issues, but they also recognize that a democracy only works if everybody's following the rules, that there's going to be some give and take. And I think that's actually true for a whole lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of Republican senators and congressmen, some of them who've publicly said, we disagree with the president on a whole host of issues, but what we shouldn't be doing is shutting down the government, hurting our economy, having 800,000 federal workers who have no idea whether they're going to be able to pay the bills at the end of the month. And certainly what we shouldn't be doing is creating a potential financial catastrophe if the United States defaults. The last time there was even a threat of default, back in 2011, we know that the economy did not grow. It went backwards during that quarter. We know that as a consequence, we got downgraded. And that's not something that any of us should want to repeat. We've got to take that off the table.
As you try to appeal to those other Republicans you think you could work with, I wonder about your tone lately. I have heard from you an increasing amount of exasperation and edge, even mockery sometimes. You said one time recently, I keep hoping a light bulb goes off. And it gives the impression that you think that your Republican opponents are either craven or stupid or nuts. Is that what you think? And if you think so, does it help your cause to let people see that out loud?
John, I think it's fair to say that during the course of my presidency, I have bent over backwards to work with the Republican Party and have purposely kept my rhetoric down. I think I'm pretty well known for being a calm guy. Sometimes people think I'm too calm. And am I exasperated? Absolutely, I'm exasperated, because this is entirely unnecessary. We have a situation right now where if John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, puts a bill on the floor to reopen the government at current funding levels so that we can then negotiate on a real budget that allows us to stop governing from crisis to crisis, it would pass. The only thing that's stopping it is that John Boehner right now has not been willing to say no to a faction of the Republican Party that are willing to burn the House down because of an obsession over my health care initiative. They've now voted 40 times to repeal this. 40 times. A law that passed the House, passed the Senate, was signed by me, was ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court, that as we speak is being implemented, that is already benefiting millions of people who allow their kids to stay on their parents' plan until they're 26, that are providing rebates to families because their insurance companies have to treat them fairly, that are making sure seniors are getting cheaper prescription drugs. And I am exasperated with the idea that unless I say to 20 million people, you can't have health insurance, these folks will not reopen the government. That is irresponsible. And so my expectation is that if and when John Boehner makes the decision to put a bill on the floor, that's the only thing that's holding it up, it could happen in the next 10 minutes, and that vote takes place and the government reopens. And if and when they vote to make sure Congress pays our bills on time so America does not default on costs that's already accrued, then I am prepared to have a reasonable, civil negotiation around a whole slew of issues, and that's reflected not just by my words, but by my deeds over the last 4 years.
You mentioned calm. Wall Street's been pretty calm about this. The reaction, I would say, generally speaking, has been Washington fighting, Washington posturing, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Is that the right way for them to look at it?
No, I think this time's different. I think they should be concerned. And I had a chance to speak to some in the financial industry who came down for their typical trip. And I told them that it is not unusual for Democrats and Republicans to disagree. That's the way the founders designed our government, democracy's messy. But when you have a situation in which a faction is willing, potentially, to default on U.S. government obligations, then we are in trouble. And if they're willing to do it now, they'll be willing to do it later. One thing that I often hear is, well, Mr. President, even if they're being unreasonable, why can't you just go ahead and do something that makes them happy now? And I have to remind people...
Or the constitutional option.
Right. What I have to remind people is that what we're debating right now is keeping the government open for 2 months. We would then be going through this exact same thing in the middle of Christmas shopping season, which I don't think many businesses would be interested in. We saw what happened in 2011, and then we'd have to go through it again 6 months from now and 6 months after that. And one thing that I know the American people are tired of, and I have to assume the vast majority of businesses are tired of, is this constant governing from crisis to crisis. So in that sense, do we need to break that fever? Absolutely. We have to stop doing that. Let's get a budget that allows people to plan over the long term, that allows us to deal with our fiscal problems in a sensible, reasonable way, even on an issue like health care. If they want to give me specific suggestions around how we can improve delivery of health insurance to people who need it, people with pre-existing conditions, I'm happy to talk to them about it, but I'm not going to do it subject to the threat that somehow America defaults on its obligations.
4 years ago, at the beginning of your presidency, the U.S. government bailed out Wall Street firms whose issues had caused big problems for the country. Is this now an opportunity for you to ask Wall Street bankers to help save Washington from its misbehavior and put pressure on Congress?
Well, again, John, I have to say this. This is not a problem of Congress per se. This is a problem with a particular faction in the Republican Party. Democrats are acting responsibly at this point. It doesn't mean that there haven't been times in the past where Democrats didn't have unreasonable demands or there wasn't the usual back and forth.
Can these Wall Street guys influence those people?
Well, I think Wall Street can have an influence. CEOs around the country can have an influence. I think it is important for them to recognize that this is going to have a profound impact on our economy and their bottom lines, their employees and their shareholders, unless we start seeing a different attitude on the part of that faction in Congress.
Any awkwardness around having Jamie Dimon in and asking him to help with that effort? At the same time, he's been in discussions with your Attorney General about his bank's legal issues?
Well, keep in mind, this was the financial services group. I talked to the Business Roundtable a while back. I'm going to talk to any CEO and any company in America about why this is important. Oftentimes when you're outside of Washington, the default position, both for ordinary voters, for businesses, for the press, is to say, this is the usual squabbling. Both sides are acting like spoiled children. This is not one of those situations. This is a situation in which once we get back to a normal process of bargaining, it won't be pretty. People may not like every outcome. That's why we end up having elections. But at least we know that Head Start kids aren't getting thrown off the program because the government shut down. At least we can feel confident that small businesses are still getting their loans processed through the SBA. The Small Business Administration provides $1 billion worth of loans every single month. Right now, that process is frozen, and that means there are small businesses all across this country right now who are being impacted unnecessarily simply because we've got a group of folks who think that they can hold America hostage for ransom that they can't win through an election.